This is Regained Wellness Podcast with Jamie Logie, episode 162, Pros and Cons of Cannabis.
Get some sour cream and onion chips with some dip, man. Some beef jerky, some peanut butter. Get some Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars, a whole lot of hot. Make sure chocolate, gotta have chocolate, man. Some popcorn, red popcorn, graham crackers. Graham crackers is the marshmallows, the little marshmallows, and little chocolate bars, and we'll make some s'mores, man.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yo.
Also, celery, grape jelly, Captain Crunch with the little crunch berries. Pizzas, we need 2 big pizzas, man. Everything on them with water, whole lot of water, and onions.
Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jamie Logie. I run regainedwellness.com, and this is the Regained Wellness Podcast. Thanks for coming on out. Or if you're brand new, extra special, welcome. So I'll just get right into it. This podcast has disclaimers like all over the place here, that I'm not advocating anything to do with cannabis. It's not something I do or part of my life, but I'm Canadian, and today is, let's have a look here, October 21st, 2018. So last week, cannabis became legal completely nationwide, coast to coast. One of only a couple countries in the world that it's completely legal. There's a few, I don't know where you're listening from. If you're Canadian, you know all about this. This is all we've been like listening and dealing with. And, you know, there's Colorado has it. I think Michigan is looking into the whole thing. So it's been such, especially living here, it's been with the lead up to it going legal. It was actually supposed to happen in, I think, July or June. And for whatever reason, everything got pushed ahead, and so many logistical things to do with it. And in the weeks and months leading up to it, we've just been inundated with information about, you know, why it's legal, you know, the problems and potential issues that will come with it. On the same side, a lot of the health benefits that come with it too. So I thought it's worth looking into. Just it's always a relevant topic, and it's always kind of at the forefront of whatever. So probably worth just diving into the information and the research and see what it says. And it's just, like I said, I'm not advocating anything, and hopefully this even goes up. Like Apple and iTunes has a lot of restrictions on things, you know, whether it's, you know, drug use or whatever, or controversial topics. So hopefully it's nothing that gets flagged like that. I mean, like, fun fact, I technically can't swear on this podcast because when you list it in iTunes, there's different categories, and there's one that's based around explicit content, and then you can just let it fly or not. And, you know, if you are listed as like a clean, whatever show, they still sort of search and are able to identify if, you know, cursing comes up or controversial stuff or whatever, and then that gets it flagged. So it sort of limits and kind of decides like who can be exposed to the show, who can't be, stuff like that. So if you've listened to any of my episodes, I've had a lot of guests on, and I had, if you know Diamond Dallas Page is, he's a professional wrestler now who runs this really popular yoga program. And I had him on talking all about all this stuff, but the guy curses like a sailor. And so like every 3 or 4 words. So it took me honestly, like probably 4 hours just to edit all the F-bombs out of that show. But it's an awesome show, so go listen to it. So that's the whole thing. So if you're listening to this, it obviously got through what it needed to get through, and you're listening. So like I said, disclaimers, it's just more looking at what at the moment where I live has been a massively big topic. And it comes down to the fact, like, if, you know, whether you're pro or against it, we live in a society where we have legal stimulants and legal drugs available to us, whether it's from the simplest one like caffeine, which is a psychoactive drug, no matter how you look at it, probably the world's most consumed drug, to the fact, you know, tobacco and alcohol are legal in a sense. And then, they're available there. I mean, and you're almost encouraged to buy it. They advertise Bacardi and Marlboro Lights and cigarettes, and all this stuff is, not only available, but it's almost like it's encouraged at times. You know what I mean? If you've watched any beer commercials, you almost feel you're left out if you're not, consuming this product, which goes for any product, but the fact they're doing it with these like legal addictive drugs. So with marijuana and cannabis, it sort of falls under that umbrella. And the fact that depending on what you look at, is it as harmful as those other things like tobacco or alcohol? Probably not. And we'll get into it more here. So that's why it's always just been, under this sort of prohibition thing. And in Canada, it's been 90 plus years since it was sort of cracked down on and all that sort of thing. So if this is new to you or you're against it or for it, there's, information on both sides. So I'll try and cover everything. And again, not advocating. Okay. So I thought I'd start with this, and you heard me use the word prohibition, and everyone, obviously associates that with alcohol, but it's kind of interesting. I don't know if many people like know this, of why marijuana in the first place became, banned how it was. If you look back into the like late 1800s and stuff, and people were using kind of narcotics willy-nilly and, carrying around snuff boxes and opioids and, the idea of cocaine being in Coca-Cola, which is not technically true, but there's two men that are honestly responsible for kind of the modern federal level legal prohibition of marijuana, again, more based in the States, that's been around for 78 years. So one is named Harry Anslinger, and the other is William Randolph Hearst. You probably know of, he was the huge newspaper mogul. And if you've ever seen Citizen Kane, that Charles Foster Kane, that was, I guess roughly based on William Randolph Hearst. So Anslinger was this government bureaucrat who in 1930 became the director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And now that's the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency. So this is like a whole nepotism story. He was appointed by his wife's uncle, and William Randolph Hearst, like I mentioned, was the publishing mogul and also a timber mogul. He owned a major proportion of newspapers and popular magazines and a lot of timber mills and forests and everything like that. So think of him sort of like Rupert Murdoch in his day. So according to like the biography on Hearst, he did not like a lot of minorities and poorer people and stuff like that. And he used a lot of his chain of newspapers to kind of keep tensions up a lot of the time. And in his eyes, he thought these motives were justified because he lost around 800,000 acres of timberland to the Pancho Villa during the Mexican Revolution. So he was, just not, he's doing whatever he could to sort of, undermine people who were, hurting his bottom line. So if you look back, the term marijuana comes from a Mexican slang, marijuana, with an H. Good accent, huh? And it was first coined in the U.S. in the 1890s. It was popularized in the early 1930s by, at the time, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, in articles appearing in, magazines and newspapers owned by Hearst. So Hearst, via his publishing empire, continually attempted to taint public perception of the plant by leveraging, kind of popular prejudice against Mexican Americans. So the Mexican Spanish term marijuana with the H was used to elude the public's existing sort of familiarity and comfort level with hemp and the medical application of, cannabis tinctures and stuff like that. And it was interesting. It wasn't cannabis at the time wasn't commonly smoked. It was, more tinctures were a big thing, and like medicine and like these concoctions they put together, which is, tonics. And that was kind of the popular thing of the day. So, again, like at the time, the terms marijuana or whatever wasn't even included in dictionaries. And if it wasn't for, the efforts of this Anslinger and Hearst, the herb would almost certainly just be referred to as cannabis. And So they, like I said, it was more, monetary reasons why a lot of this stuff was done. And Anslinger drew upon kind of the social stereotypes and prejudice of the day to give it, sort of stigmatize cannabis. And, like he would say, there are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., reading quotes from the excerpts from the books and everything. And he said most are, Negroes and Hispanics, Filipinos and entertainers. And he linked, their satanic music and jazz and swing, which is like, we look at jazz and swing music now sort of in an endearing way and we romanticize it. But at the time, this was like the devil's music to a lot of people. And, this, they said, resulted from marijuana use. And, it spread through entertainment and nightlife and everything like that. And this Anslinger, again, he made a lot of highly, provocative statements to kind of, incite sort of fear mongering. And he would say, like, marijuana is an addictive drug, which produces in its users insanity, criminality, death. He would, and then a lot of racist undertones and the stuff I won't get into. So Hearst and Anslinger were supported by Lamont DuPont of the DuPont Chemical Company, and they ran a lot of like variety of pharmaceutical corporations or whatever. So again, they had a financial interest in defeating hemp to promote their own products. So, DuPont started selling rayon, which is the first man-made fiber. In 1924, he invented nylon. That was a direct competitor to hemp to use in stuff like that. So one reason pharmaceutical and petrochemical companies disliked cannabis was because people could grow it themselves. And it's something that they could not control, and too many people could have access to it. And it was super cheap to grow and produce. So in February 1938, Popular Mechanics magazine reported that hemp was the new billion-dollar crop in the United States, due entirely to the introduction of mass production harvesting equipment. Now, like, this automation of farming was a lot easier. And again, like, what are you going to grow? Like soybeans, wheat, hemp, whatever. And hemp was looking like one of the big ones. So there was, it was easier and apparently easier to produce, and it didn't take as much labor. Like per acre, whatever, it had a higher yield rate and all that sort of thing. So even more than actually like paper, again, which it comes back to William Randolph Hearst. So it could, what does it say here? So you could yield up to 3 crops per year in southern climates. 1 acre of hemp produces about the same amount of cellulose used to create paper, among other things, as 4 acres of trees. So, and then from there, hemp can be made into around 5,000 different products, like clothing, food, fuel, all that sort of thing. So the promise of hemp-based products was so great that they threatened to replace those made from petroleum-based petrochemicals, such as, like we said, those synthetic fibers, the nylons, all that sort of stuff, even gasoline. So if you think that was just, a slightly intimidating to those moguls, like we said, like William Randolph Hearst, you're absolutely right. So billions in profit were at risk for those old school business, cronies and their financial backers who had all their money wrapped up in timber and wood and paper and everything like that. So, and this is interesting too. Henry Ford, the first Model T, the first ones that were built used hemp plastic panels, not metal. And that it was seen that hemp panels featured an impact strength 10 times greater than steel. So Henry Ford envisioned his cars running on not just made out of hemp, but running on fuel made from hemp and other plants. So that DuPont, family and industry, that obviously threatened them. It threatened the petrochemical market, which is now again being driven by completely synthetic products. And it threatened Hearst and his huge timberland and mill empire. So there's a bit of a smear campaign that comes next. So this Anslinger guy, who's basically the government puppet of, the corporate giant entities like DuPont. Today would be someone like Monsanto. This stuff goes all the way back. It's almost at like the core of, all government. So this guy is just, these giant chemical companies are pulling the strings on this Anslinger guy, and Hearst as well, who had obviously massive interest in defeating the success of hemp. So they start on this big, long-lasting and effective smear campaign. So they together they crafted this highly inflammatory anti-marijuana public relations crusade with the goal of making the herb, people are still calling it hemp or whatever, illegal, and effectively eliminating it as a competitor to that, big variety of petrochemical products and timber. So in the interest right here of DuPont and William Randolph Hearst. So using Anslinger's position within the U.S. government and leveraging Hearst's empire of newspapers and magazines as propaganda outlets, the two basically come out with these like outlandish stories, all of which are depicting marijuana as being, destructive and for degenerates and causing all these problems, and a lot of perceptions that are still seen today. With even little things like users get the giggles and the munchies, and they basically would dramatize and sensationalize stories of pot being an evil drug and how it led to criminal behavior and murder and insanity and all that sort of stuff. And it would go, Hearst would be publishing, this is back in like the early 1920s, in his newspapers. And remember, there's no obviously TV, there's no social media, there's no whatever. So you're pretty limited to your information coming just from newspapers at the time. So he had published in the San Francisco Examiner that marijuana is a shortcut to the insane asylum. And you smoke it for a month and your brain will be nothing but a storehouse for just insanity and depravity and all sorts of stuff like that. So since this Anslinger guy was in a government position, it was easy to ban and outlaw this stuff. And it goes back to there's a doctor named William Woodward, who was also a lawyer and legislative counsel to the American Medical Association. Back in 1937, there was, in front of Congress, he said there's no evidence that the herb is dangerous, stuff like that. And it was basically it was so easy for these big kind of companies and whatever to basically call the shots and have this stuff outlawed so quick. And during the time when they were going just through testimonials and whatever to, have this bill passed or whatever, there was only 2 medical doctors that actually opposed it compared to a lot of information and other speakers and representatives saying it wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. And then, sort of evolving into the 60s when a lot of people or kids of the parents who said this stuff was terrible started smoking it, and they're like, well, we're not murdering people and we're not, going nuts or whatever. So, but at the time, by then, it's obviously well put into place. And that brings us to today here in Canada and parts of the US where, people sort of stepped back and said, let's take another look at this, considering what else is available and legal for people to buy. And, I touched on tobacco and alcohol being the other big ones, but if you look at some of the other stuff that is legal as far as, just say straight up chemicals that exist in the environment. And from my standpoint on doing like a health related show, look at things like artificial sweeteners and aspartame that have been linked to a lot of problems, more problems in a lot of cases than marijuana. And I've done a lot of shows on artificial sweeteners if you want to listen to those, or check out the show notes today, which would be regainedwellness.com/162, and I'll link up anything I've been talking about. So, and then look at other things like trans fats, which are one of the worst additive, I can't even call it an additive, but creations that we have that we've been consuming for decades. Finally, people are realizing like this stuff is actual poison and has been killing people. And now it's been slowly put into place to start phasing this stuff out. And again, here in Canada, I'm not even sure what the timeline is. I think within a couple years, it's got to be gone from all products. And things, packaging had to indicate trans fat content, things like that. Again, this is a man-made poison that has just been fed to us, sort of with no regard for health, because again, it's cheap to produce. It leads to a better bottom line. There's less wastage. There's longer shelf life. High fructose corn syrup is another one. Again, like actual poisonous stuff and what it's doing to people. So I think it's just, this is kind of what draws me into the whole debate, that I understand why marijuana can sort of sit at the table as being legal when all this other crap is, and it's looking not to be as bad as some of these things, again, like the trans fats and the high fructose corn syrup and stuff like that. So that's a long rant on the previous past, but I find it very interesting. And it kind of goes in, again, I recommend you listen to the episode I did on aspartame, because aspartame followed almost exactly the same path as marijuana, but in the reverse way as far as getting it legal. And in its case, it was from the get-go, it was already seen as dangerous. People would not promote it. Doctors and consultants and anyone like in the FDA would not approve it to go through. And it took a guy who worked in the Reagan administration, and how he was kind of, again, not surprisingly, coerced by giant multinational companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, basically to get this stuff passed through for human consumption, because there was a lot of money to be made in it, when the regard for safety was, just thrown out the window. So, again, listen to that episode. It's really good, and the information. So it kind of parallels this in a bit. So, but looking at the actual breakdown here, and we can go into like more detail on how, marijuana is produced and cultivated and everything like that. But I want to look more at the issues in it that either can be beneficial for health or maybe not so beneficial. And starting off, we're looking at the compounds in it that are creating these effects. So it's CBD versus THC and what the differences are. So CBD is cannabidiol, and I can never say that properly. And then if you want to make it worse, I'll try and say THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, something like that. And those are the two natural compounds found in the plants of the cannabis genus. And so CBD, so you might be familiar with these or you might not. So CBD is found primarily in extractions from the hemp plant. So you can get it in gels, gummies, oils. It's getting really big as a supplement, in an extracted form for things like, joint pain, anxiety, sleep, everything like that. So THC, which you probably know, that's the psychoactive compound in marijuana. And, I mentioned, caffeine is probably the most well-known psychoactive that we consume by the boatload, and sort of not regard it. But you know what I mean? It's just, it's such a common thing. So it'll be interesting to see 100 years from now or whatever, how marijuana will be viewed and all that sort of thing. So obviously it's consumed by smoking marijuana, but it can come through in oils, edibles, tinctures, capsules, everything like that. So both compounds interact in your system, but have very different effects. So the chemical structure have the CBD and the THC have the exact same molecular structure: 21 carbon atoms, 30 hydrogen atoms, and 2 oxygen atoms. And a slight difference in how the atoms are arranged accounts for those differing impacts on the body. So CBD and THC your body makes its own what they call endocannabinoids, and you have an endocannabinoid system. And the CBD and the THC are chemically similar to your body's own endocannabinoids. So this allows them to interact with the receptors. And the interaction impacts the release of neurotransmitters in your brain. And, neurotransmitters are chemicals responsible for relaying messages between the cells. So despite the fact that they have the same chemical structure, they have different psychoactive effects. So actually, like CBD is classified as a non-psychoactive compound. So it doesn't produce the high that comes from THC. So THC binds with what's called the cannabinoid 1, a CB1 receptor in the brain, and it produces a high or a sense of euphoria. And the CBD binds very weakly, if at all, to those CB1 receptors in the brain. And actually, it can interfere with the binding of the THC and can actually lower the psychoactive effects. So, and, you know, we still have to look into the legality of all this stuff. So the issue of legality for both the CBD and THC in the U.S. Have been changing, and obviously they've completely changed here in Canada. And all forms of cannabis are illegal in states that haven't legalized it, and marijuana and THC are on the list of controlled substances, obviously prohibited under federal law. So, like I said, there is, you know, it's not that marijuana is technically fully illegal. It's always been legal, you know, in the sense of being prescribed by a licensed physician and for medicinal uses. And that's been around for a long time. But then compared to, say, states like Colorado that, you know, have allowed it freely, and like I said, Michigan sort of being on the border, and my entire country saying now it's fully illegal. And you can still get it for medicinal reasons, like reasons, and from physicians for different strains and concentrations and stuff like that. It's such a complicated thing, like how this is all being put together, because as of, I think it was the 17th, October 17th was the first day. So we're going to have actual marijuana stores, and there's a few that have opened up. They're already in the East Coast and in Alberta. I don't think there are any opened up here in Ontario yet, but it's going to be like a slow rollout. So these stores are going to be all over the place. So as of October 17th, it was available to be bought online, so but through the government. So if you don't know Canada, we have our stimulants controlled as far as, say, in the case of alcohol. You can, in Ontario here, you can only buy alcohol through the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, the LCBO. And that's government-run stores that have liquor, wine, beer, everything. Only recently, in the last year or two, has there been more availability of things like wine and beer, but only in grocery stores and not a lot. So say compared to other countries where you can walk into any just like corner shop and buy any alcohol you want, we can't do that in Canada. So we have to get them from these, like I said, these liquor control board stores. So it's going to be the same thing with the marijuana stores. They're going to be under sort of that umbrella, and they're going to be called, I think, just Ontario Cannabis Stores, OCSs. And they're going to be open in the same sort of areas where the liquor stores are. And there's rules around that they can't be, you know, within certain proximity to schools and, you know, all sorts of stuff like that. So it's been like a slower rollout that eventually, you know, each city will have, I don't know, 10, 12 of these stores all over the place, and you'll be able to go in and buy basically whatever you want. And I think the law is you can only have 30 grams on you at one time. You're allowed to grow marijuana at home. Again, it's probably a certain amount before it gets into looking like you're, you know, growing it for distribution. And that's one of the reasons in Canada that why they wanted to pass it. And, you know, I got to think first, the monetary gain is a big one, because like the first day weed went legal in Canada, all the stores were sold out. All the online stores were sold out. They made millions just in the first day. So this is a giant cash grab. But the other reasons were that they say, and obviously seem legit, was that they want to be able to take marijuana out of the hands of illegal growers and distributors, control more of that, control its availability so that it's not as available to, say, young people. So these are some of these reasonings behind it, that they'll take a better grasp of the whole market by controlling it, and the sort of black market won't be as bad for it. So like I said, in the stores, you can go in and you can buy different strains. Eventually you'll be able to buy like in, you know, oil forms, even edibles, and they're going to be able to control the concentrations and stuff like that, where you can balance, THC levels to CBD levels and stuff like that. So I was talking about earlier, the medicinal reasons. People who want it for certain conditions still, they can get them from these stores, but then they can get them specifically still from their licensed physician, again, looking for different concentrations and whatnot. So one of the big issues when marijuana has always been illegal is they're like, people talking about like the CBD, like this should be more available because it doesn't have the high drug related effect that the THC does. It doesn't even have the same issue as, like, it doesn't even hit your body like caffeine would or sugar would, or tobacco, obviously. So that's always been sort of at the forefront, and now we're looking like more into the medical benefits. And CBD and THC actually have some of the same medical benefits. They can provide, again, relief from several different conditions. And again, when you're using CBD, you're getting that relief, but it doesn't have that high effect associated with THC. And a lot of people prefer the CBD. They just want the relief from different conditions I'll get into in a sec. So they actually, in June this year, 2018, the US FDA, they approved a product called Epidiolex. And it was it's the first prescription medication that contains CBD. And it's used to treat rare but difficult to control forms of epilepsy. And again, depending on your thoughts, it's and I see the justification is like, why are we not using this stuff, and why is it illegal if it actually can be helping people? And that's why a lot of people are advocating for it. And in Canada, they've decided, yeah, that's okay. It's got a lot of benefits compared to, say, tobacco, like where there's not a single benefit in tobacco, and it's legally sold and pushed on everyone. So the conditions like we're talking about with like relief wise with CBD, that it can help in things like seizures, inflammation, pain, psychosis and mental disorders, IBS, inflammatory bowel disease, which I did not know until I was researching all this, nausea, migraines, depression, anxiety, some of the big reasons right there for it. So THC as well, in conjunction with the CBD, if you're just smoking or using marijuana in whatever form, they're put together. And then again, there's different balances, but the THC can be helpful for things, just general pain, muscle spasticity, glaucoma. Most people are aware of that. Insomnia, low appetite, just sort of throw back to my intro. If you knew that from the classic movie Half Baked, where Jim Brewer is going off on the amount of snacks they are needing with the great Dave Chappelle. Fun fact, I saw Dave Chappelle live a few years ago, which was sorry, side rant, huge thrill. Like, one of the great comedians of our time. He's kind of considered like the Bob Dylan of this era in comedy. And he did this small little pop-up show in Toronto. And this was after he'd been, if you know Dave Chappelle, and he did the Chappelle show, and then he walked away from it, and he's just sort of disappeared for years and years, and then slowly started coming back. And then he did these 4 pop-up shows, 2 in Detroit and 2 in Toronto. And my brother got tickets somehow for this small little theater. I mean, like, people were dying for tickets. It maybe held, I don't even know if it held 300 people. And we get in there, and there's a DJ on stage, and we're like, oh, that looks like Drake, but he wouldn't be here. Walk up, and it's Drake, who just wanted to hang out for the show, and he was just DJing the pre-show and whatever, and hanging out with everyone. And then to see Chappelle, which was amazing. He did 2.5 hours, but and the thing with Chappelle, he's just so kind of unpredictable, where like a week or 2 before, he hated people like trying to record him or whatever, and just walked off stage. And then one show, people were like heckling or just yelling out, just, I don't know, they're thrilled to see him or whatever, but he didn't like it. And he said, I think it was in Dallas, and he sat on a chair for 45 minutes and just smoked as people were just sort of losing their minds. So we're going in like, who knows what's going to happen? And he does like an hour, 45 minutes of just amazing stuff that, again, like I haven't seen him doing any of his other specials, and I wish I like could have recorded it just to remember it all. And then he starts to take crowd questions, and the crowd's just jackasses, and everyone is, I don't know what happened that night. Everyone is just yelling stuff out, and he starts to like lose it. And he spent probably 45 minutes just on stage, walking around, answering some stuff, but just sort of like ripping into the crowd. He'd say something funny, and then people would yell, and he just wouldn't talk and whatever. And you're like, wow. And then by the end of it, we left, and you're like, what was that? And then you just realize that was the perfect combination where we saw this guy do 2 hours of stand up and then saw this sort of minor meltdown. So we kind of got everything we wanted. But whoa, I digress there. So just talking about Dave Chappelle and the movie Half Baked and the use of THC for low appetite. And that's kind of like the stereotypical stoner thing, the munchies, but it's used for a lot of people, and especially a lot of elderly people who don't have that necessarily good appetite, and they need a lot of nutrition and nutrients and a lot of protein, especially as you get older. So it's used for that. And again, like I said, I probably already said it, like nausea, anxiety, stuff like that. So a lot of good benefits. So let's look at the actual side effects. So in the case of CBD, it's pretty well tolerated, and even in large doses. And research suggests any side effects that do occur with CBD use are likely the result of drug-to-drug interactions between CBD and other medications. So people who like turn to CBD, who might be having different problems and issues, are probably already trying to address it with other stuff or medications, and then they're either not I don't know, bouncing them right or disclosing to their doctors what they're using. And they try to maybe self-medicate. That's kind of the wrong word. When people self-medicate, it kind of got that connotation of potential hurting. But I think they try to self-diagnose themselves and then use CBD in conjunction with those other things. And then that's more what's looking to be causing the issues. So that, you know, if this is something you do or concerned, like, you know, obviously talking to your doctors and looking at what using as far as other medications and, you know, even like aspirins or whatever. So with THC though, some of the temporary side effects can include increased heart rate, coordination problems, dry mouth, red eyes, slower reaction times, memory loss. And so this is why, you know, say in Canada where cannabis is now legal, it doesn't mean it's just like a free for all. You still, you know, you can't be high and drive. You can't smoke it in public. The same thing like where you'd have like a cigarette or where you can't, same thing, you can't be consuming it in like those public places. And, you know, there's limits on what you can have as far as driving. And here it's like 0.08 blood alcohol volume with the, you know, as far as how much you've drank and when you can operate a car. And so same thing with marijuana. It's just not, you know, open season on just doing whatever, and especially driving because of the slower reaction time. Actually, apparently out in Nova Scotia and the East Coast, within the first hour when marijuana was legal, someone was already arrested for toking and driving in their car, which is hilarious. Okay. And then there's also the memory loss component that are sometimes associated with potheads, unquote. So interesting. These side effects are part of, again, the compound's psychoactive properties. And if you look at another psychoactive drug like caffeine, it's got a few of these same things. Not exactly, but, you know, the increased heart rate. Sometimes there can be the anxiety. There can be the overstimulatory effect. It can result in a little dry mouth and an increase of thirst. That's sort of a different issue, but like, you know, that's what we're just talking about with psychoactive components. So the interesting thing that it comes down to is neither compound, CBD or THC, is considered fatal, but in high THC use, it can be connected to long-term negative psychiatric effects. And very importantly, very true for adolescents who consume large amounts of THC. The use of marijuana, again, primarily the THC that's in it, can increase the risk for some psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia. And that's why, when people always say like, is tobacco limited to a certain age, and why can't you get it till you're 21? In Canada, it's 19. In other places, it's in Quebec, in Ontario, or in Canada, it's 18. Some countries it varies. And it's sort of that debate of like, you're allowed to vote, you're allowed to fight for your country, but you're not allowed to buy like a bottle of Merlot. And it's like, why? But that's the reason why these compounds are restricted and controlled, because for young people, when your brain is still developing, you can't hit it with all this stuff. And there's even insights that your brain is still developing into your early 20s. Even some people even say like to 25, which I'm not sure if that's true or not. But it's definitely 18, 19, 20. Like your brain is still going through these changes and transitions and growing, and it just cannot handle things like alcohol, tobacco, THC as compared to someone who's 40, just because of that development. So there's a very good reason why these are controlled substances. So again, like that's why we're looking at with cannabis today. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There are some issues, and especially for young people. I think I might start winding it down here. Holy crap, it's already been like 40 minutes. Like again, this episode could go for weeks based on all the information out there. And like I was mentioning, here in Canada, it's just we've been bombarded with information on all viewpoints to do with it, just to educate people. Because for a lot, and I understand like people freak out. They're like, how can this be legal? It's a drug. And I think, a big amount of education is very necessary for people to at least get an understanding of what it is and then make more conclusions if they were either on the fence or they're completely ignorant about it. So like, there's just so many, commercials you see and even like full page ads in the paper. And then obviously people encouraged to get online to educate themselves and everything. So like, hopefully you might not care less about this. That's cool. But it's always going to be a relevant topic, I think. And so it's just more about presenting as much information as possible. And again, like I said, it can go on forever. It's just, obviously CBD and THC both have some medical benefits. They're technically both considered safe, and, but despite that, they remain illegal in a lot of U.S. states, not the whole country, but in my country now, it's not considered an issue. So I don't know if that's going to end up with a flood of people hitting up our border or whatever. So I don't know. I'm just like, I'm curious what other people think, or people from other countries, or if they're looking at Canada as being ridiculous for doing this. Are we seen as being more progressive? I like, for my 2 cents, like I said, as far as these, again, I'm not promoting anything, and honestly, it's like not part of my life, but I genuinely see the benefits of it, especially in the form of the CBD and the CBD oil, and how this stuff is helping. Again, remember, there are benefits from the THC as well too. So ideally, if you're using something that has both in a good balance, it's ideal. But for, seeing people who are dealing with real chronic pains and anxiety and joint pain, and anything from like glaucoma or whatever, healing benefits, and people using it for managing cancer and issues like that. And the more I looked into it, yeah, absolutely see the benefit, especially when we're looking at the compound CBD. And it's interesting how this is all chalked up to whether you consider this a drug or a plant. And if you consider it a plant, we use a lot of other plants for a lot of benefits, but can have, positive outcomes in our life. But then some plants like tobacco can cause issues too. I would say, again, from my viewpoint, I don't think it's a good idea to physically smoke it. And that's because you're burning organic material, and that can still create maybe some carcinogens, and it maybe it's not that, well, obviously is not good for your lungs. It's not going to have all the other crap like tar and nicotine and fillers and chemicals that cigarettes would have. But I would say you're still creating like acrid smoke, And I don't think that's a good idea. I think maybe in the other forms, like with the oils, edibles or whatnot, that's probably a better way to take it. That's my viewpoint. That's something I wouldn't do. I just, that idea of inhaling anything, I'm just not a fan of. I like the odd cigar, so hopefully I'm not a hypocrite for saying that, but that's a whole other issue. So that's everything. I'm interested, like I said, what you have to think. If this is something you want to chime in on, throw me an email to info@regainedwellness.com. And just be interested to see what people have to say or discuss it further. So I will cut it off there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. Hopefully you learned stuff. I think people learn a lot, especially that earlier issue of how marijuana was sort of brought to be illegal and a lot of the stigma that's been attached to it, which looking back was, maybe not the correct way to go and was more for corrupt reasons than for anyone's health. But when it comes to a lot of things like that, that tends to be the case. So that's it. If you want to check out, like I said, the show notes where I can link up some of those other episodes like the aspartame one and some more information, it's regainedwellness.com/162. If you like this show, if it's actually been published, make sure you subscribe. Probably on iTunes is where you get it, or Apple Podcasts. But I'm basically anywhere where you would find podcasts. Subscribe, that way you get shows automatically sent to you. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Okay, thank you for listening. Talk to you later. Did I actually say lemon squeezy? Okay, whatever. Bye. I'm not high.